Hello and welcome to India Today SoSouth. I am Preeja Aravind and joining me is Ma'am Rani John, Teresa Joseph and Blessy John. They are part of Preserve Alleppey Society, or rather Rani John is part of Preserve. She is a founding member of Preserve Alleppey Society, and Teresa Joseph and Blessy, they have joined her in her crusade to save the heritage, preserve the heritage of what is the Alleppey Town. Today, they also are officially presenting their book called the Alleppey Story, which has been put together by Thought Factory Design and with inputs from Blessy John as well. So I will start with the founding member of Preserve Alleppey Society. What prompted you to pick Alleppey Town as something to preserve? Because the entire Kerala is something that needs preservation, especially in today's.
So that's an easy thing to answer because we live there. We live in Alleppey, and Alleppey, because economically it was not doing so well. So unlike other towns of Kerala, it was preserved by default. And we realized that we were living in this space and not really appreciating what we have. So that was what prompted us to start awareness of the buildings and the historic the history that was being kind of fading from people's perceptions. So that was what actually motivated us to start this project.
Okay, my next question to you: how did you end up designing, or your team end up designing a book for, or putting together something that, sadly enough, nowadays books are not something that today's generation looks forward. But then, why pick a book, and why not another docu-series or something like that?
I think Rani Auntie, who I call Rani Auntie, we had spoken about what they are doing maybe 10 years ago. And it just seemed like a really unique project because, first of all, it's a citizens movement. It is not something none of them are trained architects or none of them are conservation experts. But this really is a passion project, come from people who live there. So I think for me, I was interested, but I didn't commit to it in the beginning because I was not sure where, I didn't know enough about Alleppey and things like that. But in 2019, we actually had a meeting and we said, actually Rani Auntie came to my office and said, this has to become a book because otherwise, we don't know what to do with the content we have. We're not able to access anybody who can do anything about it. So we need to put it out there. We need to publish the knowledge we have. And that's when I got an introduction to Alleppey and the history of Alleppey. And that's when I think as a team, like with the researchers, with the help of, we had 3 researchers on board, I realized that it's way more significant than any of us who live in Kerala are really aware about. So automatically this became, something for all of us, an enriching project to work on because you learn so much more about yourself as well, like because we're all from Kerala, we're all from this region, but somehow we don't know these stories. So it really was an inspiration to work on this as well.
Blessy, my question to you will be here. From what I read about you, you are an architect and a researcher as well. What has fascinated you about Alleppey to get involved in this project?
Honestly, I didn't know much about Alleppey, except when we are going to Trivandrum or Kollam, we'll just rush through it because of the traffic. But once we started the work on the book, things kept coming up and it was really fun. When we started the history research itself, I learned a lot because I did not grow up here. I didn't know much about Kerala history itself, but this gave us an opportunity to learn so much more, and especially about Alleppey.
So I've already asked you this question over here. My next question would be, when you look at preservation, because the photographs that you see is the dereliction of things that are part of our culture, the way Alleppey itself, rather entire Kerala, Alleppey becoming one example. When there is neglect coming over and over again. How have you gone about trying to preserve it? Because at the end of the day, now there are all these governmental departments that are supposed to preserve it, but when you see, when we say in Malayalam, "Chedalu pidichu pogunu," that's what is happening to our history, at least visual history. How do you manage to weave through that kind of challenges that you are facing right now?
So that actually it was very difficult for us because we are trying to get this message across that there's so much of value to these buildings, and so in our capacity as housewives, we don't have that loud a voice. So what we could have done, I mean, we tried to raise an awareness by doing walking tours, taking people to see these buildings. So it'll have a double effect. The people who, the building owners will see these people coming and appreciating it. And so that was one thing that we did. But also the government has done something. They've identified, during Thomas Isaac's tenure, they've identified some buildings and done some conservation, very good conservation effect. And also the canals were done in 2007 by the then tourism minister. So those kind of things were gratifying. But of course, the decay is very sad. And every time we see, there was actually one building that was supposed to have been the Gujarati heritage building. Beautiful, and that was the highlight of our walk. It collapsed the other day. It just collapsed.
Collapsed?
Yes.
It was not something that was demolished.
It was then demolished.
After that,
so it became unsafe for people walking on the road. So it was.
So yeah, one more monument of our history gone.
So that I wouldn't. I mean, even I feel citizens of the town, that the realization of what the value is of all these, and also how people, everybody comes to see the backwaters. So if a portion of those people would come into the town, create that other, whole new energy, So that we've not been able to bring that across too.
Do you think a little bit about all three of us in terms of being non-Malayalis, to the fact that, we were born to Malayali parents. See, we all grew up outside of Kerala. So the history that we are supposed to learn while we are growing up, all three of us missed out on that. And considering a lot of our history is oral history, we are told by our grandparents, who may or may not live with us, who may or may not be around, it becomes difficult for people like us to connect to it unless we have some fascination to it. Thankfully, people like us, people like Teresa, Blessy, in fact, they got so fascinated that they actually joined you in the project. How do you put across this message to people where history is something, especially history, our historical roots are something that we need to look at, preserve, conserve, and maybe even restore to a thing? And how do you go about doing it with Preserve Alleppey Society? At least start with it.
So this was our small effort. Before the walk starts, we do a presentation. So before just walking doesn't, that full impact isn't there. So do this presentation, then we take people for the walk. So I think for your question, the answer is the book. This is our legacy. That any person who has some interest in their roots or in their history, this is our legacy that of these 20 years is that.
So are there the artifacts that have been highlighted in these books, are they actually there, or they have collapsed in the making of it?
Actually, there's this one church that we photographed
in 2019.
In 2019, and then there was very heavy rains, and then the whole church collapsed.
But it's in the book.
Yeah, but we got photos, so it's in the book. But the next year it was gone. It disappeared.
I also feel when you say artifacts, I think when you walk around Alleppey Town, every building is an artifact, and when you say whether it's still preserved or not, I think you'll see in the book that some maybe like because of the wood being good, or, they've got like natural ways to preserve them. But other than that, it's also, you have to understand like the economic situation is probably not up to where they can afford, like whoever's living in that home may not be able to afford to preserve it the way a common man expects. This is where I think the role of the government should come in, because it is valuable in the timeline of Kerala history. So it is not, just one person's responsibility or one organization's responsibility. So I think if with more awareness, with, more sense of responsibility from the state as a whole, including individuals of Alleppey, including everybody else, I think something can be done. It's not beyond our reach.
Blessy, when you look at the architecture, as an architecture student, what have you felt when you were doing the research for the book? What was the feeling that came across, the things that happened, the things that could happen? How did it come about?
Like Tessa was talking about it, I just remembered like there's this very old house built, and it's a very famous house also. It's in like movies and all. And now when we go there, they don't have the funds to preserve it, right? So when I see the architecture, it's basically nostalgia. I want to see this. I want it. It sets me back in time. But at the same time, I feel it needs to be preserved. Something needs to be done about it.
As an architect and a researcher of architecture, somewhere architecture is, at least my belief is, architecture is a amalgamation of physics, creativity, and some part of history and yourself. Because when you're building something, when you're drawing something out of your head, it comes from a place of self. What do you think the places that have been, when I'm talking about structures right now, those are losing their selves or have already lost their selves?
Yeah, with the new things that are coming, that's completely different. But the character of Alleppey itself, I think it remains in the old structures. This is a deep question. No, it's a very...
It's actually a very philosophical question, to be honest. But I do think, like when you say each individual building does have a personality, which obviously had a purpose, had a, its time in history, like when it was made, had access to whatever, had its intention, why it was there, the purpose it served at that time. But when you think of Alleppey Town, there is a collective purpose as well. One of the things is that all these buildings, which are so varied and so different in style, scale, maybe even the communities that lived in, it's all within 1 or 2 kilometers square foot. So it's almost like a museum of examples of architecture from that time period. And I don't think, I'm pretty confident from what I know, there was no other town in the southwest coast which was an example of this in such a small area, and functioning so well, because it was like set up with, actually Alleppey Town is a town built by Travancore Kingdom. So even in the fact that Alleppey was born, like that town was born, was intention, So everything there has a sense of place that it was meant for something. It served a purpose. Of course, today, with time, with neglect, with even maybe like a few things, yes, have been repurposed, which I think is relevant. But of course, there are things which are in neglect and may not last beyond our lifetime.
Ms. Rani, I have the same question for you now. Do you think Alleppey Town itself is losing its self as time progresses? It's a usual thing. But you living over there, do you feel that sense of loss?
Most definitely. Most definitely I do. But also one has to accept, that times change and the progress happens. But the character will definitely change. That is.
So Preserve Alleppey Society is just to preserve the Alleppey town itself. Are you, or rather, I'm guessing that's the thing. Preserve Alleppey is the Alleppey Town Preservation Unit. That is a collective that has brought up women who are living over there. Now, there is a lot of flux in citizens of Kerala itself. There is a whole ghost town of Kumbanad that is there, that people have built up their mansions and nobody lives over there. We all have seen that story. Is something similar happening to Alleppey?
I do see that might happen because the lot of young people are moving out because of lack of job opportunities. And in fact, a few houses already have started to lie vacant. Hopefully, they, when in their retirement, they might come back and enjoy what we have in Alleppey. But I do see that happening. But again, it is also a headquarters for the backwaters, so the whole system. So there is that economic activity, so that it won't die. It won't definitely not die.
So, as part of the PAS, are you kind of forming some policies or suggestions that can be presented to not just the Kerala government, but also outside individuals? Because at the end of the day, government only has this much power. It's only people who are passionate about it, who have a little bit concern about it, who will actually think about that and put their money where their mouth is.
So we don't have that much of a voice, we're not loud enough, I feel, because of, we are housewives and there's limitations to that. But I feel some of our ideas, like 20 years ago, we started visiting a cooperative koi factory, and from then we used to say, this is like, our guests actually, that was another thing. We get a lot of input from our guests, and they said this is like a living museum, because it's, handmade products, especially foreigners, the handmade is so important, so unique. So we used to talk to the secretary and of the cooperative and say, let's make this, a museum. You charge fees for entrance. Of course, that didn't happen. But when this, this renovation project happened, that has happened. So we sometimes feel it's maybe an idea that has, has sparked. Yeah. That's what we feel,
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to us,
Thank
to
you.
me,
Yes.
and SoSouth.